Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Today I would like to talk about Vivian. I finally had the chance to try her out in several teams at M0 with no signature V engine. I would say I'm rather pleased with her performance. She does improve several characters, including characters such as Jane Doe, and it makes it so much better to play her and get better scores, or should I say much easily higher scores within Deadly Assault. I also did write some notes of what were my clears while I tried it on stream. If you want to see the entire process, you can check it over on my stream or YouTube VODs. So basically for my testing, I primarily did it within Deadly Assault against Dead End Butcher, Sacrifice Bringer, and also Unknown Corruption Complex. I did try it with different buffs. One was Metamorphosis, which does provide Ether Anomaly build-up rate by 20% and also Fire Anomaly build-up rate, along with a 80% Anomaly Proficiency buff. And also whenever you trigger an attribute anomaly, the enemy defense is reduced by 15%. Also, the damage they receive from attribute anomalies will be increased by 40% for 15 seconds. So this buff is very strong and it does make Vivian look much stronger than actually what it is. That's why I also tried her with another buff, which was Final Assault. This buff provides decibel generation rate by 20%, and also whenever you ultimate, you get a 15% defense shred on enemies for 20 seconds. I believe it was important to try with different buffs just so you can get a better feel of how she looks like if you don't have the most favorable buff for your Vivian teams. In this video, I'll also talk about whether I recommend going for Vivian for your account or not. So I also made a small tier list of characters that effectively get improved with Vivian on the team, how much at least I feel and my community feels that these characters get improved by Vivian with them. Also like to let you know that a lot of you guys who watch me are not subscribed. If you'd like to support this small channel, feel free to subscribe, smile, it's completely free of charge. Now let's continue with the video. I was very impressed with how Vivian improved Jane Doe. She feels so much better to play now, especially if you pair it up with Astra Yao as well. I was able to get quite decent scores on Butcher and also against UCC. Yes, I'm gonna make some abbreviation of these boss names. I tried with both Metamorphosis buff and with Final Assault buff. Of course, with the Metamorphosis buff, it was easier to get a higher score. Also, just a reminder, these runs were done on first try, and I was not attempting to do the most cleanest, perfect run or something like that. I believe this is something like an average player would do. Smile. And I believe these scores are quite comfy. However, do note that both of these enemies are weak to Ether, which does help Vivian quite a lot. And obviously with the Metamorphosis buff, having that anomaly build-up rate and extra anomaly damage on top really makes it shine much more. So when I tried without that buff, the scores were still, I would say, relatively good. And in the near future, even without the buff, as long as the enemies are at least on weakness of Ether or perhaps physical, or sometimes even maybe both, then I think it's gonna work just fine. However, do know that Astra does play a big part within this team and it does elevate Jane further. I did try Jane teams also without Astra. We tried something like Nicole, Vivian and Jane. The team scores were much weaker though, so against UCC with the buff and without the buff, the difference was not as large. However, do know that my Nicole build had Swing Jazz, which is not necessarily the best for this team. However, I still used Anomaly Mastery Drive D6. But basically, for Jane, I believe it's a big upgrade. And if you're a Jane Doe enjoyer and you just want to make Jane stronger and you already happen to have Astra Yao, getting Vivian for Jane is gonna only elevate her further, which is nice. Then there's another character that also benefits heavily from Vivian, which is Yanagi. Yanagi with Astra and Vivian felt very smooth to play. It was very comfy team, I would say. However, do note that my Yanagi does have the signature V engine, which does make this look a bit better than what it is. But nevertheless, it still felt very comfortable against the Butcher and also against the UCC. Of course, the scores were worse without the Metamorphosis buff, but even if you have some more generic buff like Final Assault, I think the scores are quite acceptable, and it's also quite very fun team to play. I also did try Yanagi without Astra, which was really nice. Rina M1 without signature. The team also worked relatively nice against UCC. However, I did have a bit of a skill issue with this team, so I don't think my performance was good as compared with the Astra run. But nevertheless, I still think the scores were quite acceptable. Without Metamorphosis buff, the score was quite lower, but still, as long as you're above 20k, it's still, you know, 3 stars. But generally, you kind of want to aim a bit more, just so you can have like a bit of, you know, leeway, as if the content gets harder or something like that, you should still be able to keep up with these characters. Because in my opinion, if your current teams or characters barely do 20k right now with, let's say, the optimal best buffs, then you would be very concerned with how they could end up in the future. I also did try Trigger with Yanagi and Vivian. This was also quite fun team. Trigger does have signature, which does make it much better than if it would not have it. With Metamorphosis buff and also Final Assault, it was still both 30k plus, and it was quite comfy to play. I think it was all right. I actually enjoyed this team quite a lot. So basically for Yanagi, if you don't have Astra Yao available for her within the team because she's being played elsewhere, you could easily use something like Rina, Trigger. I guess you could also do it with Nicole probably. I personally didn't try it with Nicole, but I believe it should still work relatively fine. Now let's talk about the next set of characters. Let's begin with Piper. Piper does relatively well as well. You can play Piper, Astra, Vivian, or Piper, Lucy, Vivian. I think the scores were also quite respectable against UCC. As you can see, 33k, 29k without the appropriate buff. I could have played this team better, but I don't really play actively much Piper, so obviously there was a massive skill issue and you probably can get a higher score yourself. The Lucy variation, I only tried it with Metamorphosis buff and it was 28k points. Obviously it would be lower without this buff, but I still believe if you play this team relatively well, you should have a decently alright score. So if you're somebody who really likes Vivian, for example, but you don't really have other anomaly agent options, you could definitely use something like Piper with Lucy and you should be fine for now. Then we have one of the characters that I'm very happy to see that it got so much better, which is Grace. I tried Astra, Grace, Vivian, and this team was very, very fun to play. I enjoyed it a lot. However, do know that my Grace is M5 because I lost a lot of 50-50s, unlucky me. But anyways, her dupes are more of like a quality of life stuff. They don't really improve much her damage or whatever. So even if you have M5 or M0, I don't think it would be much of a difference. However, I would argue that the signature does play a bigger part if you happen to have it on Grace. And as you can see from the scores, with the Metamorphosis buff against Butcher and UCC, quite comfy, nice, like 42k points, 39k in points. This was pretty good. Also do know that UCC is weak to Electric and Ether at the same time, so that really benefits something like Grace plus Vivian. And without the optimal buffs, you're still able to get above 30k points. So I would say that if you're somebody who really likes Grace a lot, Vivian Astra will effectively elevate your Grace further, and she's gonna be in a relatively good spot. However, if you do not have Astra Yao and you want to play Grace with Vivian without Astra, the performance unfortunately drops quite a lot. I did try it with Rina. With the Metamorphosis buff, it worked relatively well, 28k points, but with more generic buffs such as Final Assault, it was not even 20k points. Guess it's fair to say that they had a bit of a skill issue here as well, but you definitely could push 20k plus. But right now I would say that Grace is finally in a better spot as long as you have Astra plus Vivian for her, and she's gonna be able to clear endgame content just fine. Then we have Miyabi. You might be surprised about this one, but from my experience, I don't think Miyabi gets improved that much from Vivian at all. I did try Astra, Miyabi, Vivian. I was able to get 59k on Butcher, 43k on Bringer. With the generic buff, it was of course less points. I didn't feel like, yeah, this is so much better than already with Yanagi variation or Astra Nicole version. It felt like not that much of a difference to me. I also did try Vivian Nicole variation if you happen to not have Astra Yao, only against Bringer though, and had about 35k points with Metamorphosis Metamorphosis and 34k with Final Assault. It does work, but if you're in a situation where you don't have Astra Yao and you do have Miyabi, I would just recommend save your pulls to get Astra Yao rerun or something like that. I don't think Vivian is that much of a big improvement for your Miyabi. Also, you can play with Miyabi something like Sokukun Lycaon. It is harder to play that team, but it does work and it can get you easily around 30k points even if you don't play it perfectly. And lastly, we do have Bernice. I did try only one Bernice team, and this was more like of a joke, I would say. It was triple anomaly team with Vivian, Yanagi, and Bernice. With Metamorphosis buff, it worked quite well, 31k points, but without the buff, it was 24k points. And also do know that this enemy is weak to Electric and Ether, which helps Yanagi and Vivian. This team was very awkward to play, not smooth at all. I would not recommend playing triple anomalies. You're better off playing double anomaly plus support or a stunner or defense unit if it happens to be Caesar. Speaking of Caesar, I mean, I did also try one Caesar team with Jane and Vivian. However, within that team, I happen to have Yanagi signature on Vivian. Yanagi signature time Weaver got bug fixed, so you no longer get that 30% anomaly buildup for all attributes. It's now only for electric. Nevertheless, that Yanagi engine still works relatively well on Vivian. We're able to get 24k points with Metamorphosis buff against UCC. I had a massive skill issue, especially with Caesar. I was not like parrying well at all, so definitely could push for a higher score, but still the team didn't impress me as much as the Astra version. But overall, with Vivian, I think she's a great pick up if you just want to improve your favorite characters such as Jane Doe or Grace. But if you're looking for something to elevate your existing strong characters such as Miyabi or Yanagi, I would recommend to wait for drip marketing and the upcoming character kits of issue 1 so we can see what this anniversary unit will do. Even if you do want to pull Vivian to improve your Jane Doe or Grace, I would still recommend to wait a few days when we get that information so you're fully informed how to go about it. I will cover that stuff on my channel, so you can always drop by and check me out. And I guess this is it for this video. If you have any questions or would like to add anything yourself, feel free to write it in the comments down below. And yeah, that's about it. I wish you a wonderful day and see you in the next video. Ciao.